Hi everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why sometimes a team can achieve amazing things, and other times, well, they just fall flat? It is like magic when it works, and a mess when it doesn't, right? Today we're diving into some fascinating new research that tries to map out basically every kind of task a team might tackle. Think of it like a giant, super detailed map of all the jobs teams do, from building rockets to writing ad copy. This map helps us understand why teams crush it on some tasks and struggle on others. The big problem these researchers tackled is that usually when scientists study teams, they look at just one or maybe a few different tasks. This makes it super hard to compare findings from different studies. It is like trying to compare apples and oranges and trying to figure out which one is better. We don't have a good system to say how similar or different two tasks really are. So what these scientists did is create something they call the task space. Imagine it like a giant chart with many different dimensions, or features, that describe a task. Every task on this map has a score for each of these features. This way, we can see how close or far apart any two tasks are in this space based on their features. They even created a task map with 102 tasks from all sorts of previous studies. To show how useful this task space is, they ran a huge experiment. Their main question was the classic one: when are groups actually better than individuals working alone? You might think the answer is straightforward, but it turns out to be a big fat "it depends." They picked 20 different tasks from their task map, making sure they were really diverse. Then they made each task harder or easier. They got over 1,200 people to do these tasks, some alone, some in groups of 3, and some in groups of 6. That's a lot of different situations being tested a whopping 180 times. And the results? They found something pretty wild. Group advantage wasn't a steady thing. In some cases, groups did 3 times worse than the best individual, but in others, they did 60% better than the top individual. It really depends on the specific job the team is doing. This is where their task space really shines. Instead of just saying, "it depends," their task space can actually predict when groups will have an advantage. Their map was way better at guessing group success on new tasks compared to older ways of categorizing tasks. So why is this so important? Well, as this paper points out, the field of teamwork research has tons of great studies, but they all talk about different tasks. It's like a huge pile of puzzle pieces, but they're all from different puzzles. And we can't see the big picture. This makes it hard to build on previous knowledge. The big question researchers have wrestled with for ages is, when do groups actually help and when do they hinder? We know they can be better, but when exactly? The answer has always been complicated, usually starting with "it depends." We've known for a long time that the task itself is super important, but tasks are complex. They have many different features, and we haven't had a good way to measure and compare those features across tasks. There have been attempts to classify tasks before, but they often use really broad categories, and scientists don't always agree on what makes a task unique. For example, calling 2 tasks intelective doesn't tell you if one involves a lot of math and the other needs a huge vocabulary. These old systems miss a lot of important details. This incommensurability, meaning things that can't be directly compared, makes it tough to replicate studies or understand why findings differ. Is it a bad study or just a different kind of task? We couldn't tell. So the goal of this research was to fix that. They developed this task space, which has 24 different dimensions or features that describe any task. Think of them like ingredients for a recipe of a task. Instead of putting tasks into just a few buckets, they represent each task as a point in this 24-dimensional space. This lets them measure precisely how similar or different any two tasks are. They then took 102 tasks that had been studied before and mapped them onto this task space. This created their task map, a catalog of how different tasks stack up against each other on these 24 features. This map is huge because it means we can finally say how similar a puzzle-solving task is to a room assignment task, for example, and really understand if conflicting research results mean something important, or if the tasks were just too different to compare. Now, how exactly did they build this space? They didn't force tasks into rigid categories. Instead, each task is like a vector, a list of numbers representing its value on each of the 24 dimensions. This is super flexible. This mathematical way of representing tasks lets scientists do cool things like find similar tasks, pick tasks for experiments in a smart way, and even understand what makes tasks semantically related. And it's not set in stone. Researchers can easily add new tasks, new features, or update things as our understanding grows. It's like a living map that can evolve. Going back to the background, they looked at tons of previous ways to classify tasks. They found a lot of them didn't agree, focused on different things, and sometimes even defined tasks differently. That's a big reason why integrating research has been so hard. They identified 3 main reasons for this confusion. First, different scientific approaches, like focusing just on the problem itself versus how people behave when solving it. Second, whether the research was done in a lab or in the real world, which changes how tasks are perceived. And third, the level of detail used to describe tasks. Sometimes it is super specific, and sometimes it is very general. So after all this work, they settled on 24 key dimensions. These cover things like whether a task requires physical or mental effort, if it involves planning, creativity, or if there is a clear right answer. Looking at the table of dimensions is pretty interesting. For example, there is a dimension for demonstrable correctness, which asks if there is an objectively correct solution. Another is creativity input, asking about the amount of creative thinking needed. They also have questions about whether a task is divisible unitary, meaning if it can be broken down into smaller parts. To actually rate these 102 tasks, they used over 120 people from Amazon Mechanical Turk. These workers were trained and tested to make sure they understood the questions about each task. They rated how much each dimension applied to each task. Now, back to their big experiment, they wanted to measure this group advantage, how much better a group performs compared to the same number of people working alone. To figure this out fairly, they used something called nominal groups. This means they compared the actual interacting group to a hypothetical group made up of individuals who did the same task but didn't talk to each other. This way, they could isolate the benefit of actual interaction. The core question was, what added value does talking and working together bring, beyond just having more people? And here's the visual again of how varied the results were across all those tasks and conditions. Some tasks like advertisement writing showed very little group advantage, while others like word construction showed a strong one. They found weak advantage groups beating the average individual happened a lot, but strong advantage groups beating the best individual was much rarer, only happening for a few tasks. This highlights how crucial the task itself is. They even point out that two tasks, advertisement writing and word construction, both fall into the same broad category of generation tasks. Yet, groups did well on one and not the other. This shows how broad categories just don't capture the whole story. Now, for the really cool part, they used their task space features to predict how well groups would do. They trained their models on some tasks and then tested them on new unseen tasks. And the results were impressive. Their task space models were much better at predicting group advantage than older category-based methods. Even a model that just predicted the average performance was better than the old category models. This is a big deal. It means the old ways of categorizing tasks were barely better than just guessing the average outcome. The task space, with its many dimensions, provides way more predictive power. So, which features of a task are the most important for predicting group advantage? They did some deep analysis here. They found that two features stood out: whether a task has a demonstrable correctness, meaning there is a clear right answer, and how much creative input it requires. Tasks with a correct answer are where groups often shine, because members can help each other find the right solution and verify it. This is the truth wins idea. But what about creative tasks? This is where it gets interesting. They found groups can outperform individuals on creative tasks, which is a bit surprising because in the past, brainstorming groups were often found to be less creative than individuals. The key difference here is how they measured group advantage. In creative tasks, groups might not generate more ideas by sheer number than all individuals combined, but they might generate better quality ideas or a higher concentration of good ideas that beat the average or even the best individual. On the flip side, tasks where there is a lot of uncertainty about the right answer tasks that are not well structured are where groups tend to struggle. This is a really important point they make. They didn't just pick tasks randomly, they used the task space to pick tasks with specific features. This allowed them to see how those features like demonstrable correctness or creative actually influence group performance. For example, with word construction, it is easy to check if a word is valid, so group members can quickly generate lots of words and check them. But with advertisement writing, it is much harder to agree on what makes an ad good, leading to more discussion and less clear progress. So, what is the takeaway here? This task space and task map are a massive step forward for understanding teamwork. It moves us beyond broad, often conflicting categories, and towards a more precise quantitative understanding of why teams succeed or fail. This is incredibly useful for future research. Scientists can use this task space to deliberately pick tasks that represent different combinations of dimensions, ensuring their findings are more generalizable and the experiments are designed in a reproducible way. This work helps build what sociologists call theories of the middle range. These aren't grand, sweeping theories, but rather specific explanations that work within certain contexts. By understanding the task features, we can build more accurate middle-range theories about teamwork. Ultimately, this framework helps us understand the fundamental features of any given task. And by understanding these features, organizations can make better decisions about team formation and strategy, navigate challenging situations, and ultimately create practices that really work. Now, like any research, this isn't perfect. They acknowledge that this is just the beginning. One limitation is that they relied on human annotators to rate the tasks. Future research could use AI or expert opinions, and the way we measure these task dimensions might change over time. Another limitation is that they focused on the general task class, and not all the specific task instances. Things like how people actually solve problems, how they feel about a task, or specifics like the technology used weren't deeply explored here. These are also crucial for understanding team performance. And then there is the real world. Most of the tasks they studied were lab tasks, which are usually short and well-defined. Tasks in organizations are often more complex, messy, and embedded in bigger projects. Extending this task space to real-world jobs will be a big challenge and might require redefining what we even mean by task. What do I think? This is brilliant work. The idea of a task space is incredibly elegant because it recognizes the multidimensionality of tasks that's been overlooked for so long. They've provided a framework that can genuinely unify a fragmented field. I can imagine this being used by researchers to design more systematic experiments, by organizations to staff teams more effectively, and by anyone trying to understand the dynamics of collaboration. The potential for building cumulative knowledge is enormous. I'm really excited to see how the task space evolves and is applied to even more complex, real-world problems. So, what do you think about this task space? What kinds of tasks do you find groups excel at? And which ones are a struggle? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into teamwork research, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more science breakdowns, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.